Hello, this is Maati Wafford. I'm excited to be able to be in community with you to talk about 3-year-olds. I am the former director of equity and engagement at the American Montessori Society, and currently I am working with many Montessori schools, many educators and administrators as a principal consultant and founder of Radiant Mind Solutions. And so I'm excited to be in this new space, this new role, being able to really actualize some of the things that are most important to me. And on that note, I want to share a little bit about 3-year-olds and their potential and just how much we can learn from them, how much they teach us specifically about equity. And so this is where we're going to go today. I would love to just be in conversation with you. This is certainly a topic that it extends out to not only parents, but educators as well and administrators as we figure out how we can actually be holding space with and for our youngest of people, and how we can really, as Montessori says, prepare our children and our youth to save humanity. And I didn't say that. She said that. It's a huge order, a tall expectation that it's something that I think about and ask myself often how I could actually live into that in the space that I occupy, right? And with the privilege that I have, with the ways that I am also challenged in the society, because those challenges we know can help us to create more imaginative, liberatory spaces as well. So, thank you for tuning in to this workshop. A little bit about me. I am, wow, definitely, I'm a Montessori parent. I have two children who started in Montessori at very young ages and went all the way through elementary level and learned so much. Also, I was a homeschooling mom. I started a homeschool collective that was grounded in Montessori. And at that time, I had no Montessori credential and really was just reading about the philosophy and going by what I saw. My mom was an assistant in a public Montessori environment. And so I was always able to um, come in with my little one strapped on my back and just take in the environment. And I got out my sketchbook and I started to sketch out what the space looked like. What was this environment, these materials, and how can I go and recreate these myself? Right? I had no idea really of the world that I was getting a glimpse of, but slowly but surely, I got more curious. A lot of trial and error with trying to make my own materials, which is a great experience. But then also knew that it was time for me, and thankfully, I was able to go through a Montessori education program, not once, not twice, not 3 times, but 4 times, because I loved it so much. And I began with 3 to 6-year-olds. So that is where I'm coming from, and at my core. And then outside of that, I have always been committed to equity and justice. And so that is always at the center of my practice. It's at the center of all that I do, honestly, as an educator and also as a clinician. I work with people of all ages. Actually, my youngest client is at this point right now is a 5-year-old. And so I do work with young people outside of Montessori classroom settings, but also in more clinical, therapeutic one-on-one environments. And so I just really appreciate being able to have time to be in community, be in conversation with you about the potential of our 3-year-olds. So with that, I'm going to get started. Okay. So the secret life of 3-year-olds. We're talking about equity integration as praxis. Equity integration as praxis. And yes, even as parents, what does that mean? What does it mean for me as a parent, as a child child care provider, as a caregiver, a teacher, an administrator? What does it mean to hold space for 3-year-olds and that age group for our youngest children, and hold equity integration as praxis, keeping that at the core and the center of the work that I'm doing, the service that I'm providing, right? My parenting. So uncovering the universal potential of childhood. That's what we're here for. And that's what we're going to do. And we're going to talk a little bit about 3-year-olds in particular. So as we know, we love to center Montessori quotes. And it makes sense, right? It makes sense because if we can continue to go back and use Montessori as an anchor every day with the decisions that we make in our Montessori pedagogical spaces, if we're working to create Montessori inspired environments and homes and rooms and bedrooms, whatever the case may be. Going back to some of the things that she actually said, what she espoused, can keep us grounded in the work and keep us really focused on philosophy. And so I wanted to share this first quote from her. And a child at this time is ready to rediscover his own environment and the inner wealth of impressions which he has of it. To satisfy this need, he should have an exact scientific guide, such as that which is to be found in our apparatus and exercises. And the exercises and the materials that I want to really uplift during this session are sensorial materials. The child's sensory world is robust, and especially for a 3-year-old, right? The 3-year-old is really, of course, they've been here for 3 years in now. So they're like getting lots of good experiences. But it continues to be a rich environment and exploratory um, engagement on a daily basis. Exploring the universe and cultural environment, that is a part of what a young child, 3, 4, 5-year-old, that's what they're doing every day, all day. That is like what they're wired to do, is to explore, to poke, prod, to tinker with, to do all of those things. And we know that all those impressions, it's helping to create the sensory environment for the child. So the more sensory experiences that they have, the more robust their intellect, the more understanding and safety they have in their natural world. Sensory stimuli in the young child is really important. So we know that it's about providing them with these healthy stimulus, um, and what does that mean? And so in Montessori environments, of course, particularly at the 3 to 6 age group, primary, early childhood, that is where you will find materials that have been experimented. These are like studied and researched that are specific and unique to the developmental phases of that age group, the 3 to 6-year-old child. And so we know that sensorial materials, and that's one thing about sensorial materials, it's only found at this age for the youngest of Montessori students. And it's because they're in a sensitive period for this type of exploration. And sensory and sensorial materials in the Montessori environments are designed to refine our senses. Okay. So, a creation of order and clarity from perceived discriminations of size, color, tactile impressions, shape, smell, taste, and sound. These are all of the things that are prepared intentionally for a 3-year-old to be able to learn and refine their senses. And so I'm really excited to be able to talk to you a little bit about using these sensorial materials and seeing them as integration tools. And for me, my focus and my primary research is around equity integration and how educators, adults, can create more environments to be able to kind of hone in on that, and but also understanding that that first must begin with us doing that on an internal level. And we'll get into that a little bit more, but this is where my motivation comes from. It comes from actually being in community with the smallest of people for many years, day in and day out, right? Ongoing conversations with 3, 4, 5-year old students, young people, and really understanding what those impressions, what impressions that they were picking up on, what my role was in that, and how sensitive that space is, and how I was to be able to learn and be touched by them as well. And that is, I would say, probably the most um, fascinating part and aspect of this work is just how much we, in fact, as adults, learn from 3-year-olds. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about 3-year-old justice. 3-year-old justice. So there's so many, okay, there are so many stories that I can tell. So I think sometimes when you see me kind of hesitate, I'm like, okay, which one and what is not going to take me too far off the path? But 3-year-olds have a lot to say. They have a lot to tell us and show us about the work of justice in our environment. And I will just say that one thing that they certainly have helped to ground me in is understanding the nature of things, the wonder of things, how we can see justice in our own bodies. Right. These have been some of my personal lessons that I've learned. And also being a parent and having stayed home, day in and day out with my own little ones, what grace really means, right? What does it mean to actually put yourself in a space where, you are dependent on the environment and the outdoor and nature to kind of guide what you do, guide where you go, and where your interests are. So being in spaces with my son, I'm thinking back now, how justice played out in so many ways. And so I'll integrate that as we talk a little more. Because let's get to this. Okay, what is it? Or some things, and this is just one slide with a few things that 3-year-olds can teach us about justice. And I'm just gonna go down a few things that 3-year-olds do. They tell stories. They're learning to tell stories. This is when they begin to dig into their skill and craft as storytellers. They love to hear stories. Now, and of course, so when I say they, I am not speaking about every single 3-year-old, because you may be thinking like, well, listen, I have a 3-year-old that absolutely does not do this thing here. They do this other thing over here. And so just know that much of what I'm saying is speaking from my experience and as well as research. And then also, we all do have very different experiences with different 3-year-olds. And that's a lesson in itself, right? We have children and youth who are the most beautiful in expressing their neurodiversity. So we have lots that we can learn from our neurodivergent children, which they all are, in the ways that their brain functions and the ways that their brain processes. And it's really profound to be in that space, to be able to take some time to, on a daily basis, just see who they are and see who they're becoming and then get it out of the way. So they tell stories. They're getting into, this is where they're starting to go. They are beginning to stretch their skills. They're learning to socialize. They're also interested in new experiences, cooperating with other children and sharing, right? Okay, that's debatable, but they're learning. Okay. They're negotiating solutions to conflicts and understanding the concepts of same and different. And so I want you to When you read that list, it's, oh, okay, yeah, I can see that maybe here and there. Think about this in the context also of equity and justice. Okay. What does it mean when we begin to tell stories, or what types of stories do we tell about ourselves? Do we tell about other people, other cultures, thinking about stretching our skills and socializing with each other? What does that look like when we're in spaces with diverse other diverse humans who have very diverse backgrounds? What does it mean for us? What do we then need to do? We often need to stretch, right? So that we can be in collaboration and be in community. They're interested in new experiences. They want to know. They want to see and play with someone who looks different and who does this different thing. And they have this different toy or a different way of like splashing in that puddle of water right there. Like, whoa, let's show me, how they do that. They have these cool boots on, and or they just get down on their hands and knees and just do it with their hands, their bare hands. I want to see more of that, right? So that's where their interest lies in new things, new experiences. Cooperating with other children and sharing. Okay, of course, it's debatable, and they're learning. Negotiating solutions and conflicts. That we see this at the youngest of ages, and so much of it is modeling. They're modeling the behavior of people and adults included around them. And so, if there are adults that are embracing different cultures and different people, working towards solution, that's what they're going to pick up on, and that's what they're going to do. They also pick up on power codes and racist notions that adults hold. And so you will also see that, just like you will see the other beautiful things that come from adults. You will also see those things that are often unspoken, and sometimes they're the things, the mannerisms and the behaviors that adults have, and we're not really quite understanding or even sure how it's being brought out or perpetuated in our classroom and home environment, but it is. And it's keeping all of these things in mind. And that's why when I talked about my work being so much focused on adults and some of the inner world of the adult in terms of how we can create more just spaces for young people, this is why it's so critical. There's a lot of work that has to happen there. Okay, so these are some of the things, the connections that we can make with, you know, typical childhood human behavior, child development, as it relates to our understanding of equity and equity integration. How we can see, wow, yes, these early experiences that they're having, it is setting them up to be and to be a part of equitable spaces. And it's about how we as adults are able to nurture that and really dig into that, create more opportunity, and be explicit about it. Um, so there's lots of things that my first training being in a primary classroom, we did a lot of perspective taking, right? There's on the playground behavior. Oh, this person did this to me. Oh, I'm sorry, friend. How did that make you feel? Well, it made me feel sad. Okay, well, let's talk to this other person. And let's talk to them about it. Did you like when they did that? No. Okay, so let's tell them, let them know that you didn't like it and maybe what they could do the next time instead of this thing that made you upset. Those very first conversations about using your words, right? We know that in society, think about our society right now, today, present day, we could use a lot of these lessons again, in all areas of human behavior and human activity. When we're thinking about our educational system, we definitely can start to use our words in a better way, put ourselves in other people's shoes, our healthcare systems, being able to show empathy, right? For doctors and service providers to better be able to accommodate folks who have mental illness, being able to put ourselves in the shoes of someone else and show empathy. That lesson will never get old because we will continue to need those lessons every day of our lives, right? Every day. And so it begins here at 3-year old, at these 3-year old lessons. They have a lot that they can tell us and teach us about justice. And so when we go back into our own, maybe some of our own experiences as young people, as children, learning these things or not, maybe we missed some of these lessons and we're able now to see, wow, I never had to share my toys. I grew up in this way, or I didn't have a lot of people around me, and or like whatever this thing is, whatever the scenario is, we can start to kind of dig into that and find out how we can connect on a deeper level with our young people, and use that as a guide for our own healing and repair. Okay, so we talked about the storytelling, and I want to share a little bit about this. So that means that they're engaging in imagination, right? In imaginative play. So they're starting to be able. I mean, this expression is just like priceless here, because they get into embodying whatever the thing is, whether it's a dinosaur, right, or their teacher, or imitating a classmate, or they do all these fun things, and it's because of their sense of imagination. And we certainly benefit from being in those spaces, right? It most times it just does our heart good to be in spaces with people of any age, honestly, who are still tapped into their imagination, right? Think about it. And so engaging in imaginative play, well, what does that have to do with justice? I'm glad you asked. So imagination activism is a term, it's coined by Phoebe Tickle, um, who invites people to exercise and stretch their imaginations in order to create new possibilities and new action. And so that's exactly, I just wanted to hone in on that. This is not to go into imagination activism, but I wanted to bring that out as it's something that's current, that where you can draw connections between one's imagination and how it is can be in service to creating equity and justice and inclusion, because then we are thinking about what's new, what's possible. When we ask ourselves what is possible, then we're engaged in world building. And this idea of imagination activism, you think about, if we tapped into some of those potent early years of our psyche, as 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 year olds who had these active, beautiful imaginations where everyone was welcome, or it didn't matter, it didn't matter, and everyone was here, and we were all doing these really cool things, really looking at what the possibilities are and new action. What new action can we take if everyone is on board, or if everyone's voice is being heard? What does that look like? It's world building. And so we can tap into that. We can look at the imagination of the youngest of our children and see how and what that activates in us as caregivers, as administrators, um, as clinicians, and really see how we can benefit from that, because we do, and we certainly can if we have our eyes open and our hearts open to that exchange. Okay, so going back to the stretching the skills and learning to socialize, again, this never stops. We are always in situations where we as adults are needing and being challenged to be social in different contexts, right? Virtually. You see in the last 4 or 5 years just how our socialization has shifted, even like during COVID and post COVID, with um, with technology, right? So much of that has brought lots of things to the surface around how we socialize, and the ways we can expand and think of new possibilities in the ways in which we socialize. And then also how we may be, there may be some rigidity around that, or there's some challenges that on roadblocks that we come up against. We can think about social media and what this it's a new world. Okay, new possibilities, right? World building. There are many virtual worlds and other spaces that we have to contend with, and it requires a a new way of thinking and processing and understanding. And so, again, this is the stretch. 3-year old, 4-year old, 5-year olds, they are constantly stretching. They wake up to stretch, right? They are always looking into what something is going to do. And let's just be real. Like a lot of this exploration, it keeps us on our toes. I have to say that, right? Because while they're exploring, we have to be somebody has to clean up this mess, right? That this child is making in the meantime. But also understanding and being able to have a sense of reverence for this exploration and the sense of wonder that they have. It allows them to be able to really gain some solid grounding in their world, right? Grounding in their experience, which allows them to be more secure human beings. And so then how does that relate to equity and justice? Well, when you're secure, you're not looking to discriminate or exclude someone else, right? That's not that's not your go-to because you're secure in who you are, and you want to invite others into that experience. And so, stretching our skills and learning to socialize is something that we will always be working to do if we're lucky. And hopefully, we never stop doing that. And we can lean on, look to the wisdom of 3-year olds for those really, really core foundational lessons. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about equitable early childhood classrooms. So we talked about the stretch, right? The stretch of their skills, the stretch of the social skills, and preparing environments are prepared for such things every day. In the Montessori environment, you'll see in the curricular areas, um, they are developmentally designed for um, the different age groups of the child. That's what Montessori, one of the big things that Montessori education and environment are known for. It meets the sensitivities of the child. And so when we talk about equity, we talk about early childhood classrooms, these spaces are designed not only for their, the developmental, their size and they're experimenting, they're doing all these sensory activities, and they're also learning how to be in community. They're learning how to engage as a human with other humans, right? Who are not going to be like them. And that's not something that we want. We don't want to be around only people that are like us. We may think that that feels better or it makes us more comfortable, but in actuality, when we have diversity, when we have these differences, it piques our interest. It keeps us going. It's like a battery. It rejuvenates us and keeps us interested and engaged in our environment. When you think about in nature, some of the most, think about different ecosystems and diversity, some of the most beautiful, what we consider like the most beautiful of like of botany and, you think about it, it happens on the edges of ecosystems where there's like a little bit of this and a little bit of that. And then you have these beautiful flowers, this new form, right? This new species of whatever, fill in the blank. It happens within diversity, the most exquisite of the things. When we mix scents, then we get these different things that smell so yummy, right? When you mix cinnamon and vanilla and other things, then you have these intricate experiences that are um, something that we look forward to. We appreciate that. And so looking at bringing all of this diversity into early childhood classrooms, it means we are constantly asking questions. critical questions, explicit questions. And this is something that I tell you, in anytime I'm engaged and gathered with people, especially Montessori folks, I am reminding them and encouraging them to ask these 4 questions in anything that they're doing. So no matter whether you're a parent, a Montessori parent, an educator, an administrator, policy maker, researcher, ask yourself, whose voices are not being heard? Heard where? Anywhere, wherever you are, whose voices aren't being heard? If you're about to sit down and read a book, a quiet book with your little one, think about whose voice isn't being heard in this book. It's beautiful. It has these beautiful illustrations. There are not all these beautiful, complexions of all, different backgrounds. But I want you to continue to ask yourself, but whose voice isn't being heard here? And you might think, well, there's just 3. It's for us to start to think and ask these questions so that we can know how to get critical with our little ones, even the youngest of ages, right? We can share a beautiful story and also then encourage them. But what do we know about homes? What don't we see here? Yeah, we don't see apartment buildings. Don't we live in an apartment complex? So we know that houses, they look different, right? Or some houses are made with different materials. Some of them are made with clay or wood or, different materials. And that could be based on where you live, what's accessible, what types of resources are accessible to you. Um, so having lots of conversations and modeling critical thinking, it begins at the youngest of ages. And so, whose voice is not being heard? Maybe there aren't any elders being consulted. Yes, maybe you just want to point that out. And of course, and this is not to slight books because all books are not going to do all the things, but that doesn't mean that we can't take it upon ourselves to insert some of the things that we know will be important for this child to start to grapple with, even at a very young age. Um, there aren't any children who are wearing glasses in this book, but we know that children do, right? It's very simple. A very simple statement like that, followed by a question, keep it moving. Another question, who is being silenced? This question is slightly different from the first, right? Whose voices are not being heard? That's a question. Who is being silenced? That's another question. It is a distinction that's being made here. So then we get into um, inequities. We get into um, how there are some people, voices, perspectives who are targeted or are actively being discriminated against, and it's for us as adults to open the conversation for that, because they're going to pick up on it whether you talk about it or not. They are going to feel it because it's happening to them. They will see it and feel it if it's happening to you as their caregiver, as their teacher. And they may be observing um, assistants in their classrooms who, let's just say, because this is the fact, and I don't have the research to say it's the specific numbers, but in many of Montessori environments, assistant teachers or the assistants in classrooms are of color, people of color, women of color. And so there may be some very nuanced power dynamics that they're picking up on. They're picking up on the assistant that's being silenced by the head teacher, right? Or the lead teacher, the master teacher. There are dynamics there. And as adults, we know that they exist, whether we want to talk about it or not. And you better be certain that the little ones are picking up on it. They're picking up on it for sure. And if they're not talking about it or getting an opportunity to really, you know, dig into that inequity, then what's happening? Those ideas get concretized, right? When we talk about lessons and experiences and impressions being incarnated in a child, this is what that looks like. when it comes to injustice, the injustices that they see and that they're a part of, and that are being perpetuated onto them. How is this happening in your classroom, in your home, right? In your fill in the blank, your school? Why is this happening in your classroom or in your policy, in the program that you're so excited about? Why is this happening and then not being addressed? You're creating programs for your school, or these really cool after school activities, and you're not considering individual voices. You're not thinking about or asking yourself who's being silenced. We learn these things and teach these things, and it can start at the smallest of ages. And how do we do that? How do we dig into this practice? I want to uplift the idea of remembrance as a practice. For me, as a Montessori administrator, educator, and researcher, remembrance is critical to my practice. It's critical to what I do on a daily basis, because remembrance asks me to get back into who I was, where I came from. And so I want to just share a little bit about that. Embodiment. Embodiment is to feel the physical experience of being ourselves. This is something that's visceral. I'm talking about visceral experience of being ourselves. And just to take it back to those sensorial materials, are about things that are rough and smooth, right? These are very like concrete experiences that we are giving our students, our children at a young age. This is really, really tall. This is really, really short. These things are itchy. There's like the rough and scratchy, and we come up with all these different adjectives. They start to explore all these adjectives because there's this distinction. There's a distinction that's being made. And this requires that we get into our body. We have to be inside of our bodies to be able to feel those sense perceptions, those impressions. Living life informed through our sense experience of our body is what embodiment means. And I'll quickly say, one thing that I always notice, and many of you, if you're educators or even parents, and caregivers, you may see this when our students get older, as they grow, and they go back into preschool or classrooms. One of the first things that older children or students, I'm talking about middle, high schoolers, elementary students, they always tend to go to the practical life area or the sensorial areas, right? If they're just like stopping by, they might, if it never fails, like for me in my practice, I would just watch, and it never failed that they would somehow make their way around to sensorial, or that bowl that just has all those things in it that they could touch and feel. They need that. It continues to be a thing. And even more so now because of technology and where technology is taking us and has taken us, we need to keep our children in spaces where they can be embodied. And this embodied remembrance for us as adults, it requires that we remember. It requires that we tend to our inner children, right? That inner part of us, that we have to tend to that child in order for us to tend to the child that's in front of us. We have to go within, tend to the child within, in order to address and tend to the child that's in front of us. And then that is a whole workshop. Not even a workshop. That is like a whole thing, right? And a lot of work that I do now is around this topic right here. This is how I am working in terms of coaching educators, working with caregivers, coaching parents and administrators around connecting with their communities. It starts with connecting with their inner child, and then reconnecting with our own values. This is the type of remembrance that I'm talking about, that we want to get embodied and remember these things. Some of the things that, I want to name this practice, this concept. It often takes us into some murky waters. It can take us into memories that don't feel good, and so just in naming that and understanding that as a clinician, right? Definitely understanding this as it impacts our personal practice. It can impact our parenting and our caregiving, and our teaching and our connecting. So the more we connect with ourselves in this way, the more we can connect with children and we can see them. You can see pain and frustration and isolation in a child more potently in a, when you maybe experience that yourself or you're attuned to it, right? You don't have to experience the same thing, but to have that a type of attunement, is important to this work and to being effective in this work. So on that note, Dr. Montessori says in The Secret of Childhood, a teacher must be initiated. He must begin by studying his own defects, his own evil tendencies, rather than by being excessively preoccupied with the child's tendencies. So there you go. She said it. Thinking about our own defects. And it's a little harsh. I mean, the words you might think like, oh my gosh, evil tendencies are like, we're not talking, we are not typically not in some cave, like hovering over some concoction, doing something evil and plotting some evil tendency to be espoused towards little ones. That's not typically what's happening. But what does happen is sometimes we have parts that are not healed, parts that we are continuing to grapple with, and we may not understand how it actually is living in our bodies, and coming out in the things that we do. And this is where we talk about modeling. It's important to understand these things, because that's how things get perpetuated and passed on through generations. We see it in our society, we see it in our homes, right, in our lineage. So just being mindful of this, and which is why, again, my work as a consultant and a coach and a clinician, it takes me into places where I can, one, heal in my own way for my own self, but then also to see this is such a critical thing is needed for us to be effective. And so then this gets into the psychic integrity. The Okay, yeah, I'm looking at a typo. The psychic integrity, of being able to protect the psychic integrity of our children and understand what psychic integrity is. And this gets into mental health, right? And I just want to end on this. Is definitely not to go into this because that's not the session, the content, but this is much of the work that I'm doing now is mental health and Montessori. What profound, and I want to leave you with these two questions. What profound changes do we see in how we live, perceive ourselves, and interact with the environment? What changes have occurred? What changes are so subtle, so very subtle that we look up and we're like, whoa, wait a minute. When did I start bringing my phone to the dinner table? When did it happen? Right? Just asking ourselves this. And that requires us to get embodied. We have to be in our bodies to start to understand the changes that are happening in our minds, in the ways that we function, in the ways that we interact with each other, how we're perceiving ourselves, interacting with our environment or not. Because some of us can look up and say, well, I haven't been outside in 3 days. Well, what have you been doing? You've probably been on your phone, or you've been connected to technology maybe. And it's not to say that that's the only thing, because sometimes we are homebound. Sometimes we have um, limitations, disabilities, where we can't get up and get outside. But what I just want you to think about is how these changes, that there are subtle changes that contribute to our mental health. It contributes to how we engage with the environment, and how we process, and that this gets into how we can be of support to each other. And then safeguarding well-being and dignity. This happens every day. Um, in Montessori classrooms, we are in the business of well-being and protecting the dignity of our children and of each other. What happens though when we become mere vessels for input and output? What does that feel like? What kind of disconnection does that bring about? What happens when we exist in a state of fragmented being? Okay, so I'm leaving you with those questions. I want to tie this back into the things that we can learn from children. Children are they're completely embodied, right? They throw their bodies on the ground and they do things that we think are disgusting, like they want to lick the floor or they're embodied. They need to, that's how they experience the world. And there's something for us to learn from them, right? We know better. We know that it's not probably not the best thing to lick the ground or your bottom of your shoes. We get that. But then we also need to understand, like, what is that about though? What drives them to do that? Is what's driving them to do that is they're trying to connect. And so I want to just encourage you to um, find ways, get in communities where people are centering this work, centering how to be in community with children and learn from children, connecting with their own inner children, writing about it, learning about it. That's what we need to be able to do. And I invite you to work with me, to join me in my community, Willed Radiance community, because that's what we're exploring every day. And I'm going to leave you with Dr. Montessori. There can be no doubt of the fact that a child absorbs an enormous number of impressions from his environment, and that external help given to this natural instinct, it kindles within him a lively enthusiasm. In this way, education can be a real help to the natural development of the mind. Thank you so much for your time and your attention to this content, this topic. There's so much for us to do together, and so much for us to be and to learn from each other. And so I encourage you to reach out, go to www.radiantmindsolutions.com. You can find out more about my writing, more about Willed Radiance. You can find out about my services, find out how to be in community with me and doing this work. You can find me on LinkedIn as well. All of that you'll find on the website, www.radiantmindsolutions.com. Take some time and you can go to this QR code and you can go, it'll take you right to my newsletter, or it'll take you right to the website. And then you can be in community and find out ways to work with me with coaching. I consult with schools all the time. Thankfully, I appreciate the Montessori community has wrapped its arms and continues to wrap its arms around me and my work. And so I'm very grateful. So reach out, email me, take care. Peace.